when you got, you get 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, that's about as rock bottom as it gets mentally. And in those moments, either people clam up and kind of go inward, or they cut the crap and they will be real with you and they'll be open with you and you'll be able to get some of the best clinical work done in your entire career.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Consult a qualified professional for your needs. Views expressed are those of the hosts and guests and not necessarily those of Meet Your Mental Helper Podcast LLC or its affiliates. We are not responsible for actions taken based on this content.
Hi, I'm Jim Weisbecker. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Arizona, Colorado, Florida, and Ohio. The reason I started the Meet Your Mental Helper podcast is kind of selfish in a way because I just love talking shop with colleagues. But I also think the world needs to know about some of these people. And the reason I say that is I'm amazed at how much they know. And I think to myself, they should be on a podcast. But they're not celebrities. They're just everyday counselors, therapists, coaches, psychologists that work in our communities and grind it out to help us heal and to help us grow. So let's meet today's mental helper. Welcome to Meet Your Mental Helper. Today we have Patrick Thomas, who is the founder of Impact Counseling Services. Patrick is a seasoned educator, a mental health professional, a clinical therapist and clinical supervisor, and an esteemed award-winning faculty associate professor with a rich academic background rooted in excellence. Holding a bachelor's and master's degree from Arizona State University, Patrick's educational journey has equipped him with profound insights into intricacies of human behavior and the nuances of mental health. Welcome to Meet Your Mental Helper, Patrick.
Thank you for having us.
You bet. So you're now running Impact Counseling Services. Tell us a little bit about your journey to this point.
15 years ago, when I decided to get into this field, I just wanted to help people. That was it. And after, about 5 years education, doing a bunch of internships and things like that, I got into the field officially. And I noticed that there was almost a mill type, system going on where people receive services and agencies are billing and they come back over and over and over again. In fact, some companies even budget for people to be coming back in the future. And I just felt like that's not giving somebody a real chance to change their life. So many people come to counseling for anxiety, depression, normal everyday things. Some people come because they're battling drugs, alcohol, heroin, fentanyl, methamphetamines, like serious things that they really want the help for. And I just felt like we weren't making enough of an impact. And so that's why I created Impact.
Nice.
On purpose, using that word on purpose, because what are we doing if we're not making an impact? What are we doing if we're just seeing people and just as a mill, over and over and over and over and over again? If they see me and they don't learn something, if they don't get a nugget, then they're just coming to session. They're just coming to treatment. They're just, and to be honest with you, some people do that. Some people want to, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just wanting to have a back and forth and process stuff. It's a little bit more life coaching than therapy, but either way, there's nothing wrong with that. But for the people that want growth and that want an impact in their lives, if they want to change and grow, I just really wanted there to be that for people. And so created the company, and we've been doing this for technically we're about to hit 3 years, but I've been in practice for 10 to 15.
I think that's such a great business plan or a great mission statement. I'm just a one-man show, and I'll have people say to me, "You're my fourth or fifth counselor." And not to blow my horn, but they'll say things like, "In this first session, I've learned more than I did the other four." and I'll say, "Well, what did they do?" Well, they mostly
Right.
just nodded and said, "Oh, that must be hard," and did that for an hour. Then I went on to the next one, same thing, same thing, same thing. So it's refreshing to hear your take on that.
Yeah, and I tell my clients, I said some of the conversation. First of all sessions I try to make more conversational. Because let's face it, even though it's very acceptable to do therapy in 2026, it's also still something that not everybody's gotten on board with. So when you go, there's a certain level of discomfort. So I try to make it more relatable and conversational, but also there has to be the learning component. And I say that nugget might come in the first 10 minutes, it might come in the last 10 minutes, it might be throughout the entire session, but you got to walk away from session with something. And that's always my goal. Even if a client is uh, just processing and just letting it all out, there's still an opportunity to make an impact, give them a nugget, give them something to think about, something to help the growth process. I think even if it's a primarily processing based interaction, there's still ways for us to help our clients. And I strive to do that, whether it's the first one of the day, last one of the day, first one of the week, last one of the week, because everyone deserves that same, you know, positivity, that same professionalism, whether their appointments at 9 a.m. or 7 p.m.
Hmm.
I just want to give everybody the opportunity to get something from the time that they invest.
Yeah, that's the way it should be for sure. Uh, Patrick, you're designated as an LCSW-S. Tell us a little bit what that stands for.
So the LCSW, licensed clinical social worker, the S is the supervisor component. So um, it's a long path. So essentially, let's just say you're barely starting out in the field, and I know that you have experience with this as well. If you go the community college route, then you get your 2 year degree, then you get your 4 year degree at a major university. Then you go ahead and get a master's degree. Then you get an associate license. And then get the independent license, which takes a few years of essentially being an apprentice under, someone else
Right.
that's hopefully guiding you and teaching you and helping you grow. Then there's a state mandated test that you take. The whole journey, if it's expedited, can take as little as from the beginning of school to that licensure, 7 8 years. If it's not expedited, it can take you know 10, sometimes more. I know people in the field for 20 years that haven't gotten to that point, but it's
Hmm.
not because they're not talented, and it's not because they're not amazing. It's just because not everybody's trying to go in that direction. Some people like to, stay in a different position, and they find something that they love, and that doesn't
Hmm.
mean that they're bad because they haven't gone a certain place. It just means they found a niche and a place that they can make their impact, and I think that that's wonderful. The S part is the supervisor part, which after you've achieved all of that, you can go and get post training and become a supervisor. Now, becoming a supervisor isn't like being a supervisor at the Kinkos or UPS or something. you know, when you become a supervisor, what you do is you take on this task to help grow, develop, and put another person who's maybe a recent grad or somebody who's been practicing for just a little while in a situation where they can become independent. So yes, there's a lot of state mandated components to it, but really, I feel like it's a teacher mentality.
Hmm.
It's a mentor mentality, and if you don't have it, even if this sounds slightly cringy, I don't think you should be a supervisor. I think being a supervisor isn't just something you should do to maybe make more money or be more marketable. It's something you should do if you really want to help somebody grow and develop into the best version of themselves and into the best, counselor and therapist that they can be.
Yeah, I used to enjoy a lot of aspects of supervision when I was being supervised because
Yeah.
it gave me a chance to take those hard cases to my supervisor. And sometimes it was funny because she would say something like, "Why don't you just ask them this?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's all I had to do." You know what I
Right.
mean? And it was like, whew, okay, that's easy, So, um, it really was, that's one of the things I enjoyed a lot was talking about. Here's what I tried. Here's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Um, and then there was some. Do you do group supervision also?
Not currently,
Okay.
but I'm able to. I'll be honest with you. I think exactly what you were saying. I mean, the things you know after being in the field for 15 years are not the same things after a year or two.
For sure.
And to be able to ask a seasoned professional, just a normal everyday question, but actually get an answer that's based in education and practicality is just amazing. Like I think it's a super important component of what we do.
Hmm. And Patrick, do you supervise people at Impact Counseling or outside of it?
Yeah, both actually. I mean,
Okay.
I supervise my staff that's here. Um, right now, we don't supervise anybody outside of Impact,
Hmm.
but we're open to doing so. I know that one thing that I'll share that wasn't even in my questionnaire was I worked in an agency, and it was a psych facility here in the valley,
Hmm.
and it was just a great environment. It was wonderful. But when I started with them, they promised to give me clinical hours, which, clinical hours is almost like what doctors have to go through with the residency
Hmm.
before they were official. You need those clinical hours. And although I had a clinical person that was my supervisor, she wasn't my clinical supervisor. So all the time there where I learned and grew and became what I am today didn't count.
Hmm.
And the promise was always, and unfortunately, everybody on staff got the same promise. Oh, we'll be starting it soon.
Hmm.
And then, oh, the holidays are coming up. Oh, we're going to do it next year. Oh, there's, an audit, or there was always some reason, right?
Hmm.
And eventually, a lot of people just fell by the wayside and left, but it's really unfortunate. So for people in situations like that, whether it's a psych hospital or a school where there's just no one to supervise, they do, people do reach out to me and others as well, to get perspective. And, usually there's some kind of rate involved with that, but,
Sure.
that's established at another point, but if you work for the company, it's almost always covered, which is really, really nice as well. So,
Hmm.
I mean, if you find the right place as a associate level licensed individual, and you're getting those hours, like you're winning. Like that's awesome. But yes, you're right. If you're in a place where you're in a great environment, but you're not getting those hours, it is okay to seek that. And we accept that as well.
Yeah, when I first started in community health, I lost my supervisor for, and they kept saying, "Well, we'll have one soon," and it was like two months, 3 months went by, and and at the time I thought, "Man, this is setting me back," but then by the time they got one, I'm like, "I'm done with this," that was kind of part of the deal, but did find a good place and did get my hours, so it can be it just takes the looking around sometimes. But and I was going to mention, we kind of forgot to mention this at the beginning. Where is Impact? You mentioned the Valley. Tell people where you are and where they can find you.
Yeah. So we're at 3838 North Central. So essentially, give or take 7 or 8 minutes north of downtown Phoenix, which is just a perfect location because, I mean, practically anybody, I mean, all over the valley. I mean, we see everybody all the way from Nogales to Flagstaff, Arizona. We see everyone all over. But, obviously someone's not going to drive up from Nogales or down from Flagstaff. So a lot of it is, telehealth and things like that. But for anybody in the valley, if you live in Glendale or Avondale or Phoenix or Tempe or Mesa, we wanted to be centrally located so we could cater to all the people here in the Phoenix area.
Great. And does Impact specialize or have any particular niches that you highlight?
Yeah, individual treatment. And I know that sounds you know, so easy to say,
Hmm.
but so I want to challenge anybody watching this. I guarantee you've looked into, if you're watching this podcast, you've looked into counseling in one way, shape, or form, right? You probably said, what is their expertise, right? Counseling is different than your traditional medicine, where you go see a podiatrist for your foot, and you see certain doctors for certain things. Each individual person within counseling can tell you that they market, well, I focus on EMDR, or I focus on anxiety or depression, or working with individuals that maybe are just disconnected, or even sometimes individuals that are battling drug addiction or alcohol addiction. And that's great that they have those specialties. But what people should be saying, which my hope in the future is that people start saying individualized treatment, because some of my clients are very, very accomplished, very, affluent individuals. Some of them are homeless. And it's a different philosophy. It's a different approach to the different situation because it's respectful of the individual. So to me, when I hear, oh, I do this, I almost hear, where's the individual component to what you're doing? Where's the individuality? Now, if you ever talk to a counselor across the board, they're going to say every treatment plan is individualized, and they are.
Hmm.
Ethically, they are. However, the individual treatment, you're going to have different types of treatment when you're working with an individual that's single versus married, that's younger versus in the aging process. It's just different. So I say we do across the board. We work with people from 80 to 80. However, it's individualized treatment. So the specialty is making it more applicable to your life.
So it's the old I'm meet them where they're at kind of.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And you're right. That's the way we used to say that all the time, but we just I, whether it's 1999 or 2026 or 2099 or whatever the case may be, we have to be meeting the people where they're at because the only way for people to get comfortable and to feel like what they're doing is impactful, is a growth process, is if you respect, their autonomy and meet them where they're at.
100%. Yeah. I like that. Um, so you're seeing a diversified group of clients, like you say, homeless to
Absolutely.
affluent. Um,
Absolutely.
so you take insurance then, and
We do.
okay,
Yeah, we take all the major insurances. Um, we're in the process of, getting another major insurance right now. But I mean, the Aetnas, the Blue Cross Blue Shields, the Cignas. We take all the private insurance. We have actually a really unique model where we have insurance, we have cash pay, but we also have coaches. And we don't have to talk a lot about that, but a lot
as
of
much as
individual
you want,
counselors,
as much as you want. Go
right?
ahead.
A lot of individual counselors only focus on counseling.
Mhm.
But once we figure the trauma, once we work out the things and you're feeling good, but you still want to grow, there's almost like a step down process. I mean, you don't have to go that way. You can do anything you need to. However, we have counselors and we have coaches. So you don't have to say, oh, well, where am I going to go for support now that I'm done with this? We can continue to support you in that process.
Gotcha. And on coaching, that's not covered by insurance, correct?
It's not. No,
Right.
that's
Just
correct.
want to
Yeah.
make
So
that.
insurance, and thank you for bringing that up. Insurance covers counseling. Coaching is more self pay. And as a counselor, we take insurance and self pay,
Hmm.
right? But as we step down, sometimes people feel like I've stepped down into what, and they don't have any other options. So we give people options. But yes, coaching is always, I don't want to say always, but 99.9% of the time, it's self pay. Whereas counseling is covered. Most of the time, especially if you have one of those major insurances.
Gotcha.
There's still a copay, but the majority of it is covered by insurance.
Unless you're really lucky and you have really good insurance.
I've seen that before.
Yeah.
I've seen people with insurances that their copay is $40. I've seen them with zero,
Yeah.
and that is awesome.
I'm not, I
When
would
you can
like to
get
be
counseling
one of those.
services, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you deal a lot with anxiety, depression. You mentioned substance use. I also
Yeah.
saw you mention justice connected individuals. What's explain that?
Well, so I worked within the prison systems for about 5 years. I worked at all the major prisons within the Phoenix area, private prison, as well as the regular DOC facilities. And when you're a justice involved individual, you've been through the system in one way or another, right? So a justice involved individual isn't like, Joe or Jane that got a speeding ticket, right? It's maybe Joe or Jane that was in a bad relationship and maybe they ended up having to spend a couple of years reflecting on that in a facility. And now they're coming out and they're justice connected, right?
I
So maybe
see.
they have a parole officer, or maybe they are on probation in one way or another. Maybe they're in a situation where, quite frankly, it's not as easy, right? So if you're talking about, I don't know, Billy, and Billy spent 2 years abroad, hiking in Europe,
Hmm.
it's going to be a little bit of a different situation for him versus, you know, another person named, let's say, David or something, and maybe David spent 2 years down, because he had a disagreement with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I'm gonna date myself just a little bit, but the movie Con Air
Mm-hmm.
was a really really popular movie back in the late '90s. Nicolas Cage,
Yeah.
former military guy, he gets into an argument, and I can't remember how long he spends in lockup, but he's in lockup. He's in there, and he's got this whole set of morals, and his family's waiting for him. He's totally not what you would think when you would think of a justice informed individual, especially if you have no, real connection to that.
Mm-hmm.
But anybody can be. And when somebody has an incident or an occurrence that comes up, one of the easiest ways to become a justice involved individual is to have a couple of drinks, make a bad decision, and then now you have a DUI,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's especially if you had more than a couple of drinks. So it was a bachelor party or whatever. You end up saying having 7 or 8. Now it's not just a regular DUI; it's a aggravated DUI. And so now maybe instead of a few $1,000s in fines and classes, maybe you're spending a little bit of time. When you get out, you still deserve opportunity. You still deserve a chance to continue living a full life. And I think that it's important that we connect justice involved individuals with opportunities. There's been so many studies to show that the more we connect individuals, the better our society is, versus taking away resources, leaving people feeling hopeless. And quite frankly, when you feel like you're backed up and you're hopeless, it's tough to make good decisions. So
Mm-hmm.
I want to be that person that, again, makes the impact,
Yeah.
helps, people along the way, because, at the end of the day, I like to think of a good therapist as, I like a lot of sports movies, and I think about those Rocky movies, right? Even the Creed
Love
movies,
the Rocky
there's
movies.
always,
Love the Rocky.
right? There's always the corner guy, there's
Mm-hmm.
always the cut guy or whatever. And,
Mm-hmm.
and, at the end of every round, they go and they sit. That's what we're doing. We're helping. Hey, did you see this? And
Mm-hmm.
let's pay attention to this. And then they go back out and they fight the round. And I just think at the end of the day, when my clients win, it's because of the hard work that they put in. But everybody deserves that shot to win,
Yeah.
right?
That's a great
And
analogy.
so, yeah, so I absolutely, I love being the corner guy, the boxing guy, or just the person in the background that gets to help for 2 or 3 minutes, and then watch my client go out there and win the championship belt of life.
Yeah. And that is a challenge. I've had clients and I've known people that were trying to get a particular job, but that past was haunting them. And then they were it was half a lifetime ago. They were a teenager or
Right.
I remember before I was in the mental health field, I worked at an industrial plastics company. And I remember one of the employees there, he just seemed like the nicest kid. He worked in the shop. And one day I got to talking to him and he said, well, I was part of a holdup of a 7-Eleven or,
Mhm.
something. And I would have never known that. And he was getting his certification in heating and air conditioning and working in our shop. And,
Great.
yeah. And you just think to yourself, man, I cannot believe this soft spoken young man. But you also don't know the trauma he came from. You don't know the circumstances that he was dragged into, whatnot. So,
Well, honestly, I believe in growth because we've all experienced it on a personal level, right? I support people that play video games. At this point in my life, I don't that often, but man, when I was 13, 14, I loved this video game called Street Fighter 2. I don't know if
I
you're
can
familiar with it.
remember it. Yeah.
They've made movies about it and everything. It was just the most entertaining game. That one, I think Mortal Kombat. There's a whole bunch of great fighting games back when we were kids, and I loved them. And then life happened, and bills came, and education came, and companies are being built, and I just don't have the kind of time for that stuff, even though it's still super enjoyable. I say that because if at 13, 14, if I was into video games, and then as a 30-year-old person or as a 40-year-old person, I have different priorities. Isn't it really silly for us to think that somebody who committed a crime at, say, 15, 16, 17, or 18 or 19, when you're technically an adult, and now they're a 40, 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5 year
Uh-huh.
old with a family that they're going to be the exact same person they were when they were 18.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. That doesn't seem realistic. Of course, they're going to have some growth from when they were younger to when they were, more established as an individual. So, I think everybody. I don't care. Well, I shouldn't say everybody, but 99% of the people out there deserve that second chance,
Uh-huh.
right? I mean, certain things I know within our legal system are considered unforgivable, but one of the things that I believe America's based on is that second chance. And maybe I shouldn't even say America, because really society, we have to have the empathy, regardless of which side of the aisle you stand on. We have to have that empathy to give people chances. And so,
Yeah.
I love working with justice involved individuals, and there's challenges to helping them, with employment and things like that. But it, challenges are not a big deal, even though they are challenging. I look forward to a challenge, because at the end of that challenge, the reward is so much greater.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good growth mindset frame of mind to have. And Rocky got a second chance, right?
That's right.
He was washed up and got a second chance. So it's interesting. I've known people that have worked doing counseling in the prison systems.
Uh-huh.
Now, most of them wanted to get out of there as soon as possible and go work
Yes,
somewhere else. Um,
sure.
that's got to be interesting work.
Absolutely. I remember when I got hired at the psych hospital, my supervisor told me, "You're going to learn more in this job than you ever did anywhere else, because you're going to work with everyone, men, women, young, old, just everyone." And I said, "Oh, okay, great." And she wasn't wrong. But when I got to the prisons, that's when I really worked with everyone. I mean, again, I think just your average run of the mill individual probably thinks a criminal is somebody who, some bad person that broke the law. I can't tell you how many people in prison for 5 years, 10, even 20 were just regular people.
Uh-huh.
I remember this one guy, he served our country for 20 years. He went back to school, he became a nurse. Um, he came back off like a 20-hour shift, caught his wife in bed with a gentleman, made a bad decision, and then they ended up giving him 20 years. I'm minimizing what occurred, but
Sure.
I mean, we all know what occurred.
Hmm.
Reality is, I'm not saying that he should have got 20 or shouldn't have got 20, but what I am saying is, how many people can say that they've been cheated on? I mean, hopefully not a lot, but in our society, it does happen.
Uh-huh.
So, there was this one kid that I worked with, and he really was a good kid. I know that sounds kind of silly. He was in prison. How could he be a good kid? He was. He was 18. I think maybe 19, 18, 19 years old, and he was using substances. And you really aren't you when you're using substances. You think you are, but you're just not. You're just not. And so him and his friend were playing with a gun, and it went off. And unfortunately, it ended her life. And they gave him almost 20 years. And it's like,
It's
a,
hard.
a, a death occurred. It was a
Uh-huh.
horrible moment, but intent has to mean something,
Uh-huh.
right? And I'm not defending behavior at all, but what I am saying is, not everybody in there is a premeditated individual that had the thoughts to do this. And heck, even if they were, again, you serve your time. I believe that second chances are necessary for our society. So, again, working with individuals that have served their time, have went through the system, are wanting to work hard, are wanting to change their life. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to work with individuals with that mindset.
Yeah. I think people often think prisons are, and definitely they have them, sociopaths and psychopaths. But
For sure.
I remember one of my clients, her husband was a prison guard for many, many years. And
Yeah.
she said, he always said this guy just had this one snap moment of bad judgment. Otherwise, he
Yeah.
was clean as could be, you know?
Yeah.
And how long did you work in the prisons?
On and off for 5 years. It's interesting, James, and thank you for that question. You mentioned some people, in fact, most, get hired in that position and are trying to find a way to get out almost immediately. And it's because, they have colors, and I'm not talking about gang colors or anything. They have, colors, and you have to be on yellow all the time. Right. When we as people drive to the light, green means go, Red means stop, yellow means assess,
Hmm.
essentially. Right?
Okay.
Are we stopping? Are we going? Are we speeding up or slowing down?
Hmm.
That's kind of what it's like almost all the time there. I mean, and I've worked on level 1 yards, which means, you know, maybe too many traffic tickets or maybe a DUI or maybe a bad check writing or something like that, all the way up to level 5 yards, which are the individuals that multiple murders, multiple other things, they're probably not going to be leaving there, or it's going to be a 20-year sentence. And in all circumstances, whether it's a 1 yard or a 5 yard, and I've spent most of my time on a 4 yard, so not the worst of the worst, but I have worked 5 yards. There's always a yellow. There's always a chance, for anything. But I think the real privilege, and for anybody that's worked in that atmosphere and then left, or worked in that atmosphere and said, "Oh, I got to get out of here," it's such a shame, because when you sit there with an individual that has 20 years in front of them, the line stops. They've got 20 years in front of them. They'll be honest with you and converse with you, and you can make a real impact. And again, I'm not trying to play on the company words, but
Sure.
you can make an impact, and it's they say a lot of times in certain communities you have to hit rock bottom before you can make changes. I don't believe that. I think you can make changes if you put your foot in the sand and say things have to be different. I got to be different. I got to make this change, and I believe in that. But when you got, you get 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, that's about as rock bottom as it gets mentally. And in those moments, either people clam in or clam up and kind of go inward, or they cut the crap and they will be real with you and they'll be open with you, and you'll be able to get some of the best clinical work done in your entire career. And it's a shame that because it's such a volatile environment where you're always on yellow and there's always a certain amount of risk,
Hmm.
but you take that away, the work you can do is so impactful, because they're an audience and they're not going anywhere. And so all they have is time, and they put a different level, not all obviously,
Sure.
but the ones that admit that they want things to be different put the kind of energy in that you hope everyone would.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I have had multiple clients who've done time, and some say, man, it was super traumatic. It was super, but then, and I've seen things I can't unsee. But on the other hand, I can remember at least two, and they were, almost heavy drug use. And they said, man, that
Yeah.
18-month sentence or that 2 years I did I wouldn't be alive right now had I not done it.
That's the ugly side of it. And yeah, it's really unfortunate.
In fact,
I
one even said
I
it's the
actually
best thing that ever happened to them.
it really is both,
Mhm,
right? There's just one client that I worked with inside and outside, and he was on a mental health yard. So he was a violent individual, nice enough guy, but he was violent. And but when you're on a mental health yard, there's a lot more freedoms. So at any point, I mean, the doors are open, they're free walking. It's almost psych hospital kind of, free range. Um, and a couple of months after I left that particular, because a lot of the prison work that I've done is contract based.
mhm,
So the contract ends, you renew or you don't renew. Sometimes you take a break. So it was one of the times that I took a break and I went back to the psych hospital, and I saw him there. And he was like, "I know you." And I was like, "I know you too." I said, "How have you been?" And he's like, "It's so good being sober." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he's like, I had to stay using in there just to get through the time." And it broke my heart, but I understood the perspective,
mhm,
right? And he was a totally different person. So you're right. Some people, unfortunately, go that route where they feel like they have to do that. But I do believe that there's this phrase on the inside. It's do the time, don't let the time do you.
mm,
And like you said, some people say it's the best thing that ever happened to them. Other people say it's hell on earth. But especially counselors, social workers, therapists, we all talk about, grassroots and helping and making a difference. That's a place where there's not a lot of representation. So I don't think you can work there 20, 30 years without it affecting you.
Mhm.
But I do think it's a really unique, rare experience that I think a lot of people should at least have at least one, you know, instance in their life where they can go back and say, I did that and I made a difference, because it's truly a humbling undertaking to do that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
when you're on, you mentioned being on yellow light, that kind of cautious situation.
Sure.
How did you, 5 years is a good while. How did you regulate your nervous system in those situations?
Well, I have a unique, and I didn't put this in the questionnaire either, but
Mhm.
I have a really unique story as far as what I did before I became a counselor. So there's about 5 to 7 years of schooling prior to becoming credentialed to actually be a counselor. Well, I spent that 5 years working for the National Football League. I worked for the Arizona Cardinals, but I also worked for the National Football League itself.
Huh.
Cardinals for 7 years, NFL for 5 years. And so we would get calls to situations all the time. Um, so when I transitioned to being a counselor, after completing all the degrees, certifications, and licenses, it wasn't nerve wracking or scary when I was in the psych hospital and they do a code 10, which means all hands on deck because something bad's going on, or an ICS, incident command indicator in prison, which means they're locking everything down most likely, and there's a situation in this particular area. The one thing that I always knew was that I had to be the coolest head, because when they got on the radio and they said ICS in D wing or whatever, I knew it within 90 seconds there was going to be 3 to 12 officers, there was going to be a sergeant, a lieutenant, there was going to be medical, and then there was going to be me. And if I wasn't the calmest, coolest head, things could go, I mean, forgive me for saying it this way, but things could go left real quick.
Mhm.
And so, I would come in there, assess immediately, and just be kind and compassionate. And I was grateful to be able to do that, because quite frankly, I worked with just some amazing officers. I mean, I cannot tell you. I mean, officers are like people, some are good, some are not. But I work with some great officers that would tell me, man, I wish I could have talked him down like that, or man, I really wish I could have been that compassionate. But because I'm in this role, I have to be a little bit more authoritative. And I'm like, I completely understand that. But thankfully, because of my role, I could be kinder, more
Mhm.
compassionate. I could go run into a situation, and again, we use last names a lot, so I'll just make up a last name. Jones, Jones, what's going on? These guys are doing X, Y, and Z. I know, but be with me right here. Be with you where? Right here, buddy.
Mhm.
Right here. And then, all right, all right. Take a deep breath with me. Okay, okay. And then on the back end, while me and him are taking a deep breath, I look at the officer and say, relax, relax, or
Mhm.
give me, 30 seconds. Give me 30 seconds. And then they would, and the whole situation would be de-escalated. And it was very satisfying to know that a couple of deep breathing exercises, a little bit of eye contact and compassion kept that individual from getting into a fight, and also kept the officers safe from getting to the fight either.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people think sometimes people become officers so they can, get into it, and I don't know too many that want to get into it. Most of them would prefer not to have to get into it, because one thing that I would say to the women that I worked with in the prisons, the men that I worked with, and the officers, I said, we're all on the same page. No, we're not. I can't be on the same page. No, 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 no. We all have one goal, including me. We all just want to go home, right? I get to go home tonight. Officer might get to go home tonight, but you're going home in 3 months or 3 years or whatever. I always used to like to say days. So if it was 3 years, like you go home in 1,000 days or you go home in this amount. But our goal is always to make it home.
Mhm.
And so to be able to make sure that everybody got to make it home without incident, that was a pretty again, it was challenging, but it was a really wonderful opportunity to help both sides.
That's a great way to frame it. Yeah, really, that really makes a lot of sense. Um, with the piqued my curiosity. What did you do with the National Football League?
I worked event staffing,
Oh,
and
okay.
it's so interesting, because without going into a lot of detail, because I obviously want to stay focused on our reasons for
Right.
talking today, but it was really interesting. I'm again going to date myself a little, but when Super Bowl 42 came here to Arizona, they needed to hire about 3 to 4 thousand people, and they did. And I just got to see all the intricacies of everything. It was here in Arizona,
Uh-huh.
and the Black Eyed Peas were the halftime. They brought on Slash and Usher. It was super fun. But I got to see the intricacies of the entire operation, from the security side to the operations side. We got trained by all these different entities, and it was such a pleasure to be able to see things from a broad scale.
Uh-huh.
So seeing, I mean, we all watch the Super Bowl, and you're
Sure.
like, wow, look at all these moving parts. To be able to see it step by step was an amazing experience. And so
Yes.
after they hired about 3 to 4 thousand, as soon as it was over, they ended up keeping nine, not 10, but nine. And because I worked double shifts and 20 hours and
Uh-huh.
covered, gave people rides and, in the little golf cart from assignment to assignment, and brought them water and all the things, I was one of the nine that they kept.
Oh,
And
wow.
I stayed there for 7 years, and it was for 8 years. I'm sorry, 8 years. I ended up working seven Super Bowls, a few Fiesta Bowls, a
Oh, cool.
national championship, and probably about 100 Cardinal games.
Uh-huh.
But when you see things from a larger perspective, it makes individual, crises smaller.
Uh-huh.
You're like, I can handle this, because this is not this big, big, big thing. It's a big thing, but it's still just a big moment,
Uh-huh.
not a constant kind of thing.
Yeah. So what drew you, Patrick, to mental health?
The helping people. I know it sounds so easy, but
Uh-huh.
I can't tell you how many people say I never had a chance, right? Especially young people. There's so many studies to prove, if you come from a broken home. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the ACE study,
Oh, yeah. Use it
adverse
all. I
childhood
use it
experience,
almost daily.
right?
Uh-huh.
And there's studies to prove, if you have four or more, all these risks for health and all these. Well, there's also studies to say that if you just have one person, one, whether it's a caring teacher or a therapist or a coach. I mean, heck, even I don't know if you're familiar with the actress Tiffany Haddish. She was doing a comedy show, and she like stopped and squinted and like kind of looked, and she's like, "Oh my god, is that?" And I can't remember the name. Is that whoever? And then she starts crying, and she's like, "That was my social worker. When nobody cared,
Yeah,
she cared." We don't need a huge cheerleading squad. I mean, if you have it, that's awesome. I'm so happy for you. But
sure.
we just need one. We need one. And I always felt, you know, the people at my high school, my elementary school, if you weren't an athlete, you were just kind of stuck. You were going to have a tough road, and there weren't the resources available that there really are today. And I'm so glad that there's more resources available today, but there's still not enough. And I knew that I could take my skills, I could take my talents to South Beach. I'm kidding. That was a LeBron joke. I'm kidding. I knew that I could take my life in a direction where I could work, for companies, or I could do the event staff thing that I mentioned to you earlier, or, a business, or whatever. But I just wanted, I said to myself, I'm going to retire one day, and it's going to be 25 years from now, but I'm still going to retire one day. I'm going to look back on my life, and I'm probably going to say, I'm so glad I did that, or, I guess I, should have made better choices. And so I knew that a life of servitude and helping others would allow me to sleep better at night, because I knew that I did the right thing. But in retirement, I could look back and say, I did the right thing for myself, for my community, for the individuals that wanted to do better. I was the person, and not like it's me, I'm the best. Like, no, no, no,
Right,
no, no.
right.
But I was the person that cared about them, and then that one turned into two, turned into three, turned into four, turned into a support system. So now they said, oh, a counselor cared. Oh, and then I got linked up with a coach, and they cared. Oh, you know what? And then I met my fiance, and they cared. And now I have friends because she has a bunch of friends. And now all of a sudden I have this whole life, and it started because someone cared. I know that there's millions. I believe this. There's millions of people out there that care, but sometimes there's a lot of people that care in a particular area, and then there's other areas where, quite frankly,
Yeah.
there's not as many people that are visible that are
Did
caring. And I just want it to be that impact maker, that person that put somebody on the right track, and so they could end up living the life that they were meant to have.
when did you have an aha moment when you decided to do that?
I did. That's a really interesting question. I like that. So I was working in elementary school, and it was in a low socioeconomic district, here in the area. We'll shout out the district, but the people that were struggling, and um, I can't remember if I was teaching second or fifth or maybe I was even teaching computers that year. It was one of those 3 years because I only taught elementary 3 years, and I really really loved it. But I noticed the need, and so I created a clothing drive, and I created a food drive, and I volunteered for this amazing organization called Girls on the Run, where and I'm sure I remember them letting boys in too, but
Hmm.
essentially it was all about being healthy and having a positive body image and just eating right but also being okay with who you are. They still to this day have a Girls on the Run 5K every year. Great organization. So I was
Hmm.
involved in just all this stuff, and I almost joined the basketball team as an assistant coach. Like, I was just in everything.
Hmm.
And one day the principal came up to me and said, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Helping." Identifying a need where nobody is creating a food drive, nobody is creating a clothing drive. It's getting colder, no one's doing these things, and so I am. And he's like, and he didn't say it in a bad way, but he did say it in a very challenging way. He said, "Are you the counselor? Are you the social worker? Are you the resource developer? Are you the case manager?" I'm like, "No, no, no." And again, I believe I believe that year I was teaching computers before I started teaching second grade.
Hmm.
He's like, "You're the computer teacher. Teach computers. If you want to do that other thing, go to school." And it kind of stunned me. And it's actually where I came up with this thing that, if you look it up, probably isn't even look upable, but I will share. I express this and teach this to individuals that I know as well as individuals I work with. That is where I coined positive confrontation,
Hmm.
because it wasn't negative. He didn't get in my face.
Hmm.
He wasn't all up my grill. It wasn't negative. We weren't arguing, but he got all up in my space and had a positive confrontational moment that changed my life, because I knew that he was right. I also knew that without a certain level of education, there was limitations. And so I'm like, you know what? Put up or shut up. And that's when I decided to go back to school, and it was a 7-year journey, but it was worth it in the end, because now I don't say this lightly. I say this with a humble heart and with a lot of gratitude. But now I get to live my dream of helping people, and it's truly a pleasure. But if it wasn't for that principal kind of getting in my face again, not in a negative
Hmm.
confrontational way, but in a positive confrontational way, who knows? Who knows where I'd be? So I'm very grateful for that tough love moment that
Yeah,
that happened all those years ago.
That's really a great story. And I wonder if he knows what he did.
I don't know. It's been a long time.
You know what I mean? And that's I think that's what I'm saying is sometimes we'll say something to someone,
Yeah.
go maybe he went on and had lunch that day and didn't know he changed her life.
Right.
Inadvertent,
Never even thought about it again. Right.
So you never know. You just never know, right? What do you think? You know, sometimes I will talk to people that have no idea what mental health counseling is about or therapy, and they'll
Yeah.
say, "Man, it must be rough listening to people bitch all day."
Oof.
Or they'll say, I mean, it's just kind of like, well, that's not quite what I do.
Right,
Or
right.
what
That's
do
why.
you think are the biggest misconceptions about uh, counseling and therapy?
Well, so I haven't mentioned this yet, but in my practice, I and again, I wouldn't say specialize, because again, I
Hmm.
specialize in the individual component of,
Sure,
of treatment. But there's such a great need, at least right now, currently, within our state, within our culture, for couples counseling. And I think a misconception is that I don't want to go to couples counseling because my counselor is going to side with one person and I'm going to get picked on,
for sure.
right? And I mentioned this to you, but I mention this to everybody in ethical, and this is crucial. right? Because hopefully everyone has a certain standard of ethics, at least I hope. With that being said, if you're an ethical practitioner, you realize that if you're doing couple sessions, the couple is the client, not
Mm-hmm.
the gentleman, not the lady, or not the individual, right? Not the
Mm-hmm.
gentleman, not the lady, not whoever's there. So it's not, oh, great for you, you're right. Great for you, you're right. No, 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 no. It's how do we find a way for this to be stronger, right? I think people that come to counseling are this, right? If this is a single person, this is a single person. When a couple comes, they're here.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to be here. This is the goal, always, always and truly, right? To
Mm-hmm.
get them here. So I think a lot of people, and I will say especially men, but it does feel that way. A lot of times men are like, I don't want to go because I don't want to get picked on, right?
Sure.
And I hope that can be a misconception that's taken away because an ethical practitioner isn't going to pick on you. Yeah, if you say something outlandish, they might call you out on it. Like, wait a minute, what does that mean? Explain that a little bit better, right? But at the same time, the client is the couple, and growing and benefiting and going from this to this is always the goal. And
Mm-hmm.
so, the best parts for me working with couples is having them have moments where they're like, oh, I thought I was going to be defensive, but I'm not. Or, oh, I didn't even want to go because I thought you'd be on one side more than the other, but you really are, you know, looking at it from both perspectives. So, there's so much more to that to answer in relation to what you just
Mm-hmm.
said. I mean, I could answer a million different ways, but I think the misconception is you're going to be judged, or you're going to be alienated. And I will say this: if you feel like you're judged, if you feel like you're alienated, maybe that's a sign that you might not be in the right space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
For sure.
I think there's great counselors, but that doesn't mean that every counselor is the right fit. You can work with, an accomplished individual who's been in this forever, and they still might not be the right fit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. It doesn't mean that they're bad. Doesn't mean you're bad. If you ever feel judged, though, I wouldn't say it's time to quit, but I would say it's time to ask more questions because you want clarification, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and maybe you're not being judged. Maybe your counselor is just trying to find out more information. So, I noticed that a lot of people will quit counseling without having that conversation
Mm-hmm.
with the counselor, right? And saying, hey, what did you mean by that? Or I don't think I understood that correctly, or whatever the case may be. Because at the end of the day, again, I know every single counselor out there takes ethics trainings every 2 years, but I believe that each and every person out there, whether they're tired, young, fresh, brand new, or been in this for 30, 40, 50 years, every single person practicing has ethics. So if you ever feel like you're being picked on, maybe you're just in the wrong space, but maybe it's because you haven't asked questions to clarify,
Mm-hmm.
because every counselor, in my opinion, wants the best for you, wants to bless you, wants to help you, wants to see you grow. And so I always tell clients, whether it's me or anybody else, unless you really, really, really disconnect right away, give your counselor 4 sessions, ask questions, find out if it's something that can work, because, you know, sometimes people make the best first impressions. Sometimes it takes a time or two.
I had a client who worked with for quite a while, some severe trauma stuff. And I remember she said, the first couple sessions, I thought I hated your guts. She
Oh
goes,
my
I'd
gosh.
never been to a male counselor, and I said, yeah,
Mm,
you glared at me like the whole time. And we went on for several years processing
wow,
her traumas and stuff, and it's just kind of funny how that works. But to her credit, she kept coming back
that's huge.
and coming back. So that's how that works sometimes. When you deal with couples, what's kind of I mean, I know it's hard to just paint with a broad brush, but what's kind of your central philosophy of working with couples?
Again, individualized treatment for sure. But I'll be honest with you, I like to find out what happened before the infidelity. You know, I mean, it's almost like a car accident, right? when you see a car accident on the side of the road, or sometimes we are in a car accidents, hopefully not that often, but you get into a car accident and the first thing you think of outside of your own personal damage is your car damage, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're the investigator on scene, you're thinking more, why was there an accident? Were they on their cell phone? Like, were they
Right.
were they paying attention? Were they looking down? Were they arguing with their partner, or like I said, on the phone, texting, or watching a video? All of these things are crucial. I have this great couple that I worked with, and they were great. It wasn't just one was great, they were both great, they were wonderful, they really really care about each other, but the guy cheated. And believe it or not, and it's interesting because I think that there's a conception out there that one gender cheats more than the other, and it's actually a lot closer.
Hmm.
And that's not just in my experience as a practitioner. I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
even studies to back that up. It's within a small deviation of less than 5%. At
Interesting.
least nowadays,
Yeah.
even though it didn't used to be back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
In this particular case, though, the gentleman cheated, but he was married for like 12 years before cheating. And of course, he was devastated because she genuinely loved him, right? And he
Mm-hmm.
loved her too. And we got into the backstory because, again, that's what I like to do. I'm the pseudo investigator. I'm trying to find out why it happened, not just deal with the damage of it happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it happened because normal stuff. You have kids, you know, you're married for 10 plus years. All of a sudden there's responsibilities and people get into rhythms and routines. And it's if you talk to couples that have been married for a year or two, oh, we still have date night, we're still having connection
Mm-hmm.
time. For those in the audience, you guys know what that means. We're still putting in effort, and that's awesome. But it's almost impossible to put in year one effort in year 10 and year 11 and year 12,
For
right?
sure.
So, but that doesn't mean you don't put in some effort. You're like, wait a minute, I did this person's laundry, or I cleaned this person's dishes. Like, I take care of this, or I pay for this. I mean, there's so many things that we still say, well, I'm putting in the effort. Of course I am. I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and that is effort. I don't ever want anybody that's watching to think that it's not, because it is. It truly is. But it's still not honeymoon level stuff.
Right.
It's not year one level stuff, right? And so they were a normal couple that was married for, like I said, 12 years. And they just got into a routine where they stopped date night, they stopped taking care of each other, they stopped watching out for each other's mental health, and they just got used to each other. A little snap here, a little snap there, a little argument here. We don't talk for a week. We haven't had special time in a month, blah, 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 blah. And then there was a really interesting thing that came in this particular situation, but it could happen in any situation. So I want everybody, male and female, to be paying attention to this. Watch for this in your relationship, especially people who've been married for a lot of years. Watch if somebody's complimenting you, if you feel amazing. Now, I've never met anybody that doesn't feel good when you're complimenting. Oh, wow, your hair looks great. Well, actually, I don't have enough, so nobody says that to me. But
But
you've
you
got
rock
hair.
it
You look
well,
great.
Patrick. There's my compliment.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You've got hair. It looks great as well. But when somebody compliments you, are you just like, "Hey, that's awesome. Thank you." Or or do you have some kind of feeling, right? And in this particular situation, the guy did. He said, a pretty it was a woman. He said, "A pretty woman hasn't complimented me in years." And then this person did. And because the guy in the story was a little beat down by life, and a little broken by life, and a little in the routine of marriage without prioritizing date night and each other, and hasn't gotten a compliment in a couple of years, when this strange new person said, "Hey, you look wonderful," or "Your eyes are beautiful," or whatever. All of a sudden, he was like, "Wow, I'm appreciated again. I'm whole again. I'm special again." And that's dangerous, right? Not to feel good and special. Those are good things. It's not
Hmm.
dangerous to feel honored and loved and appreciated. But if you're committed to your marriage, the minute you start feeling that way, get into counseling.
Hmm.
Have tough conversations with your husband or wife. Have positive confrontation. Get into some kind of service based, whether it's regular counseling or church counseling or whatever. Go to a couples retreat. I mean, it's
Mhm.
just something. Because if somebody compliments you and you're like, "Hey, thanks, I appreciate that," that's normal. They compliment you, and you start to think, "Man, I really wish I got complimented by my person." And then you're letting your mind wander. Well, because he was experiencing a little bit of depression, he really appreciated the compliments and he allowed it to go way farther than it should have.
Mhm.
And the problem with all that, besides the obvious infidelity, is that his wife really loved him. She was just also tired from all the things,
Mhm.
being married for 12 years and, you know, raising kids, paying bills, and all the things adults have to do.
Yeah.
But now she has to deal with the fact that her husband did this and it destroyed her. But they were so smart. They got into services like right away within like a month of everything happening and learning everything. They
Mhm.
got in. I worked with them for almost 15 months. Um, and they're doing phenomenal.
Great.
Um, but only because they immediately got into services. They didn't think about it and then forget about it, and a month or two later, and that's not very smart.
Yeah.
But because they got right away and they confronted it right away, we talked about the damage of the car accident or
Mhm.
the infidelity. We
Mhm.
talked about that at length in the beginning, but as we passed the immediacy of the crisis, we went back to talk about how important it is to honor each other, right? It wasn't the blame game. It wasn't, well, you didn't compliment him, so he cheated because that's not fair.
Right.
It wasn't the blame game. It was you both got, into your rhythms and routines and kind of forgot about the us of marriage and got a little, I centric. And
Mhm.
and so when we got to talking about the us component, then we got to seeing things that we can, do. And I say we a lot. I obviously mean, them in
Mhm.
the
No,
marriage.
I get.
But seeing things that we could do to obviously get back on track. And they did. They did, but because they were both focused on getting back together too. It wasn't just, I'm going to blame you. We're going to go to counseling for 2 months. It's not going to work out. And, I'm taking you, blah, 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 blah. They
Yeah.
were committed to working. And that's why they did work because even on tough days, they were committed.
What would you, as we kind of wind down, what would you
Yeah.
recommend to a couple who the honeymoon is over and the grind of washing clothes, maybe there's diapers, maybe there's whatever, work, school functions,
Yeah.
all these things to where, and like you say, fatigue. Fatigue is hard. It's hard to be romantic
Absolutely.
when you're fatigued. What would you
True.
recommend to people that are in that daily grind? They kind of get to that point where they're not, they're into that routine.
Yeah. Great question. And thank you for asking it. I would say right away, without hesitation, start a date night. I mean, just if you feel like you're in that rut or you feel like you are getting close to that, and I say this to the both people, not just one. Be creative. Think outside the box. I can't tell you how many people say date night. Are you kidding me? The economy, and I can't even afford gas, and that's a
A
real thing. No,
babysitter.
I mean it is, right, James? I mean,
Hmm.
things are very, very expensive. I mean, the days of getting an apartment for $800 are kind of almost completely gone at this point.
Not in the
You know,
valley.
right, exactly. But as recently as 5, maybe 7, 8 years ago, you could
Hmm.
find a place for under 1,000. It almost doesn't exist now. So people constantly, and it's not an excuse, it's a reality, say we can't afford date night. But that's the excuse, right? The we can't afford it. You can. We just have to be creative. It might mean going to the drive-in instead of the fancy theater, right? It might mean going to a movie in the park instead of the drive-in. It might mean, and this might sound difficult for some people, but it might mean, getting a buy one, get one free coupon for Subway and getting a blanket that you already have at the house. And then, I think you can get a Subway sub for like $11 now.
Hmm.
Bam, buy one, get one free, $11 for two and a blanket on a cool day like today. You don't think that helps mend a lot of the grind of the relationship when somebody prioritizes the other and says, and again, it doesn't have to be, the guy or the girl or the individual or whatever. It doesn't matter who it is and say, you know what, honey, here's a couple of waters that we have from the house. Here's a couple of subs that I got. Here's a blanket. Let's just sit by this lake. And the whole thing costs $11,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's important, and I obviously think that having something to look forward to is really important. I like finding activities that are really inexpensive. One thing that I really love about the Arizona Diamondbacks is you could spend $300 and get like the best seat in the house,
Hmm.
but you can also be on the 400 level at the right angle for like $12, right?
Hmm.
And 2 for 24. I think they have a deal on the cheaper hot dogs for like $2 each, $30 for two people to enjoy a game. You got to be creative. You're like, I don't even like baseball. It's not about baseball. It's about spending the time together. You got to be creative and don't be afraid. And yes, I'm speaking from a counselor perspective on a counselor podcast.
Hmm.
Don't be afraid to reach out for therapy. It doesn't, I had this one person that I was working with just drop off. That rarely happens. Most of the people I work with, they stick and they're consistent, and I'm really proud of my clients. But I just had this person drop off, and then they called me like 2 months later. I need a session right away, right away. I was like, sure, of course.
Hmm.
And then I said, why did you? What's gone on in the last 2 months? Oh, well, we weren't fighting, so I didn't call you. And I said, I get it. If things aren't crazy, you don't feel the need, but therapy isn't just for the crisis moments,
Hmm.
right? Don't wait till you've hit rock bottom. If if you feel like it's getting stagnant, like you said in your question, if you feel like all the effort isn't working and all the picnics and D-bag games are not enough, don't wait until somebody was unfaithful. Don't wait until somebody's raised their voice so much that it's hurt you, your heart, and the relationship. Just say, you know what? We're strong, but we're not 100% strong anymore. We're like 80% strong. Let's get somebody to help us get back to 100, because it's a whole lot easier. And I'll end the question with this. I was working in the psych hospital once, and I was teaching this group of like 20 people, um, deep breathing exercises. And this guy cut me off in a positive confrontational moment. And he said, dude, this isn't going to help. And I said, what do you mean? And he's like, this will help if I'm a little pissed off. It's not going to help if I'm so mad that I've already, made this, this decision. I'm about
Hmm.
ready to make this decision. And he's perfectly true. If we wait until it's the crisis moment, maybe some of those great coping skills won't work because we're way up here.
Yeah.
But if we use them when we're just 10% down or 15% down, it'll work there. But if we wait till we're 100% underwater, it might not work the same way. So
Yeah.
do the activities, institute the date night, reach out for therapy, and don't wait until it's a really, really bad situation.
Yeah.
Let's reach out before, and then so it takes less work, less time, less money, less investment, but it has a higher chance of succeeding. Every single couple that I've worked with said within 3 or 4 sessions, we should have come sooner.
Hmm. Yeah, I heard a statistic once that generally couples are 6 years late coming to counseling.
Right?
Whatever started about some research showed 6 or 7 years prior, which
Yeah.
sounds like a lot. But yeah, I always say, and I didn't make this up, but I've heard it once and I use it all the time. It's easy. It's hard to pitch a tent with 80-mile-an-hour winds and hail hitting you, but it's a lot easier to pitch a tent when you see the clouds off to a distance.
Yes.
And again,
Man,
I didn't make that up.
yeah, I love.
I stole it
Say
from
that again.
somebody. I stole it from somebody, but it's and people usually get it. I go, you still got to try though. Try and get that tent up. But
I love that though. That's a gem. I like that a lot. If we mic drop around here, that feels like a mic drop right there.
anything as we finish, anything you would like people to know that maybe we didn't cover?
You know, so much. But again, in respect for everyone's time, I'll just say therapy is not for the broken. It's for the breathing. If you're breathing, go get therapy. I again, I'm optimistic, and I believe that any therapist can help anybody. But I also know that some people feel more comfortable with certain, groups, genders, demographics, or whatever. Find that. Find that.
Hmm.
Right? A therapist isn't like finding love where you're like, well, I don't know, maybe now, maybe later. I'm
Hmm.
not in the right career place, and we'll see. And I'm not even 30 yet, or whatever people say, right?
Mm-hmm.
Find a therapist. Do it today. Sign up with me, sign up with Craig or Jamarte or Steven or Gary or, Esmeralda or whoever, because therapy is for you. I had this great conversation with a guy last night. I call everybody Bill or Steve or Dan just for anonymity
Mm-hmm.
purposes. And I was talking with Bill last night, and I said, I'm so proud of you. And he's like, why? And I said, because you came to me with anxiety and depression and a whole bunch of other things, and we've gotten past the depth of the storm. We've gotten
Mm-hmm.
into a place where it's more processing, and we talk about childhood stuff sometimes. We talk about your job sometimes and what's going on sometimes. But we've also gotten to a point where you could have quit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like especially if you're going to a trainer, you're like, oh, I'm here to lose 20 pounds. You lose the 20 pounds, you quit. People quit all the time. And I said the consistency is why I'm so proud of you, because you've already lost your 20 pounds, so to speak. You've already dealt with this and you battle this and you keep coming. And I said the reason why I keep continuing to come and being consistent is important is because, and I really want to speak to everybody watching this. Each and every one of you are a husband, a father, a mother, a daughter, a son, a wife, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Each and every one of you has a role. You work somewhere, you're building a business. Like we all fall into these categories, right?
Mm-hmm.
When is the last time you really felt like you had dedicated me time? We always say, "Oh, I'm going to do it this weekend," or "Oh yeah, I'm going to go to this concert," but you go to a concert with somebody, or "I'm going to go to this game. I'm going to go to that game with somebody. I'm going to go on vacation with
Great
somebody."
point.
You deserve the hour. I mean, out of all the hours of TV we watch,
Mm-hmm.
or video games we play, or activities we do, or things that we spend our time doing, I beg very, very infrequently, but I beg you, I'm pleading with you, give yourself the hour and don't wait until rock bottom. Reach out today. Again, to me, to Cindy, to Sarah, to Jamarte, to anybody, but get into services because there's somebody that can give you genuine feedback, genuinely cares about your future, genuinely cares about your goals, and can give you the kind of back and forth that, quite frankly, and here's something that most people won't say, your therapist doesn't have all the answers. But in the conversation, sometimes they come up with something that's mind blowing. Sometimes it's you. But that mind blowing thing that gets unlocked in your brain sometimes doesn't happen unless you're in the right room.
Mm-hmm.
You get with a counselor, you give yourself a higher percentage of being in the right room.
There have been times I've thought, what did we accomplish today? And as the person's leaving, they'll go, this this has really blown my mind. And I'm like, what blew your mind?
Yes.
I'm like, what? They go, that what you said really, and it surprises me sometimes. I'm like, okay, cool,
Yes.
let's go with it. But well, I
That's
appreciate your
awesome.
coming on today, Patrick, and maybe we
Absolutely.
can
I
talk
appreciate your
again in
question.
the future. And
Absolutely.
again, I just want to remind everyone, I will post under the podcast all the ways you can contact Patrick and Impact Counseling and reach out to them. They're pretty centrally located here in Phoenix or virtual statewide.
Right.
So again, thanks for your time, Patrick, and look forward to talking to you again. And keep doing what
Thank
you're
you again.
doing.
Thank you very much. We do it for the people. So we appreciate you very much for, giving us the opportunity to introduce us to a greater audience. And we look forward to helping them and working with you in the future.
My pleasure. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Meet Your Mental Helper. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. If you'd like to learn more about our guest, you can find them on our guest directory at meetyourmentalhelper.com. You can find their social media links to follow them and also ways to directly contact them. If you would like to be on the podcast, join our Meet Your Mental Helper network. And we have several memberships that support the work we do that allow unknown experts to be seen. Look forward to hearing from you soon and see you at our next podcast.